Hi guys, if you're new to the channel, my name is Harris and I'm an investment associate and CFA chart holder, and in today's video I'm going to outline the differences between the three CFA levels. I completed the charter earlier this year, scoring in the 90th percentile all applicable levels and passed all exams first time round. Today I'll highlight the differences between the content, the time commitment, the exams, and finally I'll wrap up with which one I found the toughest. So let's get into it. Okay, let's start with the differences in the content. Now, I'm going to discuss level 1 and 2 first because the content, i.e. the modules that you study, are actually the same. So there's 10 modules in both level 1 and 2, and those are ethics, quantitative analysis, financial reporting analysis or FRA, economics, fixed income, equity, derivatives, alternative investments, portfolio management, and corporate finance. Now, the names of the topic can vary between each level and each curriculum, but ultimately these are the 10 modules you're going to study. Now, one of the key distinctions between level 1 and 2 is the weighting of each of these topics. So at level 1, there is a higher leaning towards ethics, roughly 15% of the exam, and a lower leaning towards derivatives, portfolio management, and alternative investments, roughly 5 to 8%. So that does mean that the rest of the topics, first of all, are between 8 and 15%, and you can focus your attention on the more testable concepts if you're strapped for time. However, when you get to level 2, there is a much more even distribution across the topics, so all of them are roughly equally weighted, and that means that you've got to give each topic its due attention. So level 1 is designed to be introductory in nature, so it will give you a broad overview of finance. If you studied finance, accounting, or economics at university, you probably came across some of the concepts already. However, if you're someone like me who did a non-finance related degree, it's a great place to start. The concepts are relatively simple and they give you a good foundation. However, level 2 is a significant step up. So the content is roughly 4 times that of level 1 and it goes much deeper and is significantly more technical in nature. So if you're interested in knowing how to value equities, how to value bonds, how derivatives work, etc., it's much more fun. However, it takes a lot more time and I'll touch on that in the next part of the video. Now let's touch on level 3 because it is quite different. So there's still ethics, but you'll also have a module on the GIPS standards now, which is the Global Investment Performance Standards. So again, you'll have fixed income and equity as well, but this time with more of a portfolio management leaning, and you'll do alternative investments again too. Economics is now known as capital markets expectations, and now you'll have derivatives within risk management, which is a lot broader and more applied. Then you'll have 4 other modules. So one of them will be behavioral finance, and the other 3 will be asset allocation, portfolio management, and risk and return, etc. within that, and portfolio evaluation. So as you can see, these last 4 are not things that you necessarily would have done a lot of at level 1 and 2, and at this point you start to have to think like a portfolio manager and an investor, so it becomes a lot less theoretical and a lot more applied, which can be fun, but it requires a different way of thinking. We'll touch on that more as the video progresses. But let's now move on to time commitment. Okay, let's touch on the differences between time commitment. Now, it's widely recognized that the CFA requires a significant amount of sacrifice and dedication, and usually takes between 3 to 5 years. Some people can do it faster than this, but obviously it's going to require a lot of time. Now, a common question that people ask is, how many hours do you have to spend per level? Now, there is no fixed answer to this, and the reason for that is not every hour is equally productive. So you could have one person who spends 1 hour every day studying with 100% focus, and then you've got another person who does 3 hours, but the majority of them are spent procrastinating on their phone. The second person thinks they put more hours in, but they weren't equally productive. Now, I'm not going to go through the strategy to ensure higher productivity. I actually have separate videos on that, which I'll link in the description or somewhere on the screen, but I will broadly step through the differences in the number of hours required, and then you have to take this with a pinch of salt because it varies from person to person. So level 1, as I mentioned earlier in the video, is introductory, so naturally it takes less time to study for it. The general guidance is around 300 hours. That's probably about right. Maybe you could do it in less, 200 to 250, and in terms of overall time frame, I'd say 3 to 6 months. Now, as you approach 3 months, you're entering cramming territory, which you can do at level 1 because you don't have to apply the concepts as deeply, and we'll touch on that in the next part of the video. But ultimately, you're setting yourself up for difficulties at level 2 and 3 because those build on these introductory concepts and become a lot more applied. And at that point, if you don't fundamentally understand things from first principles, it's going to be a tougher ride. Now, level 2 is a significant step up. So as I mentioned earlier in the video, it's roughly 4 times the content versus level 1. And it goes much deeper, it's a lot more technical, and it's a lot more applied. So you're going to require more time to prepare for this. And I would say the guidance of around 500 hours is probably right, to be honest. Now, look, there are going to be exceptions, people who already work in the space or are just really quick learners. They may be able to do it in less, but actually the 300 to 500 hour range is probably about right for this. So in terms of overall time frame, I would say more like 6 to 12 months. Now, look, 12 months is a long time. You don't necessarily need that much time, but the point is you want to give yourself time to consistently work on this, digest it and absorb it, and then be able to apply it. If you cram level 2, it's going to be significantly harder, and unsurprisingly the pass rate for level 2 is lower than level 1, because look, you can cram at level 1 and get through it, but if you do the same thing at level 2, you will get found out. Level 3 is an interesting one to study for because there is actually less content versus level 2, so you're probably back towards sort of level 1 territory in terms of actual content. There's a lot fewer formulas, it's less technical in nature, so you can actually get through the material relatively quickly and you feel like you're making really strong progress. But the part where you struggle or you get tripped up is when it comes to applying it. The exam technique is very different, and again I'll touch on this in the next part, and that's probably where it's going to take more time versus getting through the content in the first place. So again, I think the 300-hour mark is probably a reasonable estimate. Now, I just want to throw something out there. 300, 400, 500 hours sounds like a lot, and it is, but when you spread that across a 6-month time frame, it's a lot more manageable. And also, if you take study leave before the exam, so say 1 to 2 weeks if you're lucky, then if you do roughly 8 hours a day over a 2-week period, that's 104 hours, and over a 1-week period, that's 52 hours. So actually, in the context of the overall number of hours, that's quite a big chunk in the last 1 to 2 weeks. So it's actually quite manageable if you do it over a long enough time frame. So look, as I said, there's no fixed answer for this, but level 1 is roughly 300, level 2 is 500, level 3 is around 300. It's going to vary depending on the person, and the things that you spend your time on also evolve with each level, but level 2 is the most demanding in terms of content and in terms of exam preparation. And let's touch on the differences in exam technique now. So before I go through the differences between all 3 exams, there's a point to note. All of the exams are roughly the same length, which is around 4.5 hours. There's an AM and a PM session, and you'll do roughly half the questions AM and half in PM. So that's an important point to note, roughly 2 hours 15 minutes in each session. Okay, let's discuss the differences between the exams now. This is probably the part where there's the most significant difference. Level 1 is entirely multiple choice. There's 180 questions. There's no vignette, and a vignette is essentially a passage of information that you read before you answer the questions, and I'll touch on how that differs at level 2. But at level 1, the questions are very direct, so you'll have a small amount of information, then a question, and then you move on to the next question and it has a completely different set of information, but it's easy to read. The questions are direct, so that means there's not that much information to digest and there's not that much comprehension required. And also, there's only one cognitive step between the question and the answer, meaning you don't need to calculate a midpoint which is then used in the final answer. So for example, if you start with A, you don't need to work out B, which then feeds into C. You go A to B and that's it. So naturally, level 1 is the easiest. You can get through the questions pretty quickly if you know what you're doing. Now let's touch on level 2, and the exam format is quite different. So again, it is entirely multiple choice, but now you have to contend with vignettes as well. As I mentioned, those are a passage of information that you've got to read before you can answer the questions, and each vignette will have roughly 4 to 5 questions each, and overall there's 88 questions. So although there's fewer questions, there's a lot more information you have to read and digest first before you can answer the questions. Now, the exam technique for these is different, and I'll touch on that in a different video, but the point is I'm highlighting the differences between each level here. Given the amount of additional reading and the fact that there's now probably 2 cognitive steps between the question and the answer, meaning you may well have to calculate a midpoint which then feeds into the final answer, it's going to take you more time. So naturally there's more time pressure at level 2. So the key difference with level 3 is that you now have a structured response component to the exam. Now, a point to note, it is not an essay. You are not going to be writing long answers. It is essentially questions where there's a free-form box where you write your own answer, but the objective is for them to be bullet points, not long essays. That's an important thing. I'll cover off exam technique in a different video, but the point is, for half of the exam it will be structured response, i.e. free-form answers. The other half will be multiple choice, as it was at level 1 and 2. So overall, there is going to be additional time pressure because for half of the exams you've got to think and write your own answer, and if you don't have the exam technique nailed down, it's much tougher to make it within the time. So that becomes a crucial part of preparing for level 3, is nailing how you answer those structured response questions, and I'll cover that technique in a different video. So level 3 is much more applied in nature as well. So as I've mentioned throughout the comparison, level 1 was 1 cognitive step, level 2 was probably 2, level 3 is almost definitely 2. You're going to have to stitch things together from multiple parts of the curriculum and bring it together for one answer, and that can be quite difficult. You have to start thinking like an investor in the final exam. Okay, so which one did I find the toughest? Now, as I mentioned, there is a significant step up in the amount of content at level 2 versus level 1. So that was definitely difficult. It requires a lot more time, but I actually really enjoyed it. It's a lot more technical in nature. You go deep into the asset classes, you understand how to value them, how they work, so on and so forth. It's a lot of fun. So even though it takes time, you'll actually enjoy yourself a lot more. I found level 3 to be a lot tougher, and there's a few reasons for that. The first one is at level 3, you have to think like a portfolio manager. And if you don't work in asset management or portfolio management yourself, that can be quite difficult. So I work in banking. I don't work with these asset classes day to day. So thinking like a PM who's working with his own portfolio is not the easiest thing. And I found that to be quite tough. Also, the curriculum is a lot less structured. So you can get through the content quite quickly, but understanding exactly what is testable is more difficult. Also, the fact that there's structured response questions makes preparing for the exam more difficult because there are fewer practice questions available and the mark schemes are generally more vague. And in the exam itself, this also adds a lot of time pressure because in level 1 and 2, they're all multiple choice. You have a general idea of what the answer is going to be, even though they are very smart in the way that they present them. However, for level 3, for half the exam, you have no idea what the answer is. It's entirely up to your understanding and intuition. And also having effective exam technique here is key to make sure you don't waste too much time. And overall, this is where a solid prep provider becomes more important. And I covered that in my first video, which I'll link either on the screen or in the description. And I'll make a separate video on level 3 specifically, going through exactly how to prepare for the exam. But ultimately, I found level 3 to be the toughest, but level 2 was also a big step up, and that was no easy ride. So there you have it, the key differences between level 1, 2 and 3. Naturally, this is a very difficult thing to summarize in 10 or 15 minutes, so I may have missed things off. I'll cover things in more detail in separate videos. And if you like this, hit like and subscribe, leave some comments if you'd like to see anything else in particular, and thank you, and see you in the next video.